Welcome back to the Art Department. I'm Brandon Nicholas. In this month's episode, we have 3 lessons from high school art teachers in ceramics, digital illustration, and drawing. So if you're interested in learning these skills or see an example of how to teach these skills, you've come to the right place. Here's 3 more lessons from the Art Department.
Okay, today we're going to be working on what's called the subtractive drawing process. And this is a method for shading that involves starting with a ground. And you can use lots of different materials for this. And one of the materials I'm going to be using today, I'm just going to start with is graphite. And then I'm also going to use charcoal. Alright, so setting a ground, you're going to need the following materials: pencil. A 6B pencil is best because it is soft and smooths out really nicely, and it also gets really dark. A chamois, which is kind of like a little piece of smooth leather, often used to put wax on cars and shine cars. But for our purposes, regular just tissue works just fine. You definitely need an eraser. I like to have a handheld. Different types of erasers are good to have. A value scale, if you've not completed one in the past, now is a really good time to actually do a value scale, because the value scale is a good tool to help you just learn to see and draw those different values that you're trying to create in a drawing in order to make it look three-dimensional. Alright, so in the past, we've created one in our art class. You want to try to get a value scale that has 10 values, alright, from 0, which is the white of the paper, all the way to black, which is all the way here. Alright, so we're going to be starting with the subtractive process, which means you're going to be putting down a value, and then you're going to be taking it out again. So I kind of started here, and what I'm really going for is probably about a 3 or 4, maybe even a 5 on the value scale. It's up to you. One of the techniques that you want to think about when you start with the ground is, number 1, make it an even value. This is really, really important. You want a nice even value. You don't want it to be dark in some places and light in others. So the trick to getting a nice even value is just apply even pressure. Don't press down hard and then lighten up, and then press down hard and lighten up. Nice, even pressure. So it takes a little bit of concentration, really not difficult. Alright, I also like to use the side of the pencil and not the tip of the pencil. Alright, so when you're using the tip of the pencil, again, it's a little bit harder, and it's going to take a lot longer to get that nice, even value ground. Okay, so ground, just think of that word as like a base. So this is going to be our base value. It's a nice mid-tone. Alright, so we're going to put a nice mid-tone down. The other thing is, try to get your value to go the same direction. A lot of times when you go sort of all over the place and go different directions, it looks a little sloppy. There's probably some artists that could definitely pull this off, to have it go all different directions and still come out with a really nice drawing. But for beginners, I definitely would recommend you sort of go all the same direction. Okay. Smoothing this out then, or blending it out with tissue, is purely optional. So if you want a really smooth ground, you can just take your tissue, sort of push that material around, push it into your paper. Okay, the other thing when you're doing this kind of artwork, it's best to have drawing paper. Something that's got a little tooth to the paper, which means it's very slightly rough. It's not real smooth like computer paper. Alright, so basically that's what a ground is going to look like. Alrighty.
Alright, I'm going to show you how to roll a slab today. Alright, so first of all I'm going to wedge. So I'm going to push forward with the heels of my hand, pull it back right away, and it's like folding it into itself. This clay's nice and soft, so it's working really well, but I'm pushing out all the air bubbles, compressing it all together. And I keep turning it up on its end. Kind of makes this like monster piece. Alright, so to do the slab, I'm just going to kind of press it flat. Keep flipping it so it doesn't get totally stuck. Don't press too hard. And then we're done. May I use your rolling pin, please? Alright, so when you roll a slab, you're just going to roll forward, let it roll out, forward, forward. And then you flip it, because I use the tables, I don't put like newspaper under it or cloth. You can put newspaper under it if you want. And I do 3 rolls. Flip it. 1, 2, 3. And this is actually a pretty good thickness. You can tell by your fingers it should be thinner than your fingers. You can use a ruler if you want. It should be thinner than a ruler or as thick as a ruler. Some people put those on the side, but you don't want it too thin because then it's too fragile and won't stand up. All right, so then you need your knife. You can cut your shape. Maybe you have a template. But I'm just going to cut just a basic rectangle. And I'm going to show how to join this rectangle to another shape. Yep. Clay base. You guys want those. Thank you. Yeah. This is my clay base. Stick it on. Comes right off the table. If you curve it a little bit, it'll stand up on its own. So what we're doing is we're building a geometric and organic slab piece. So you can do it all squares if you want, and then have like one circle. But what I'm going to do right now is connect this piece onto it. So I need to mark where it's going to be. I'll mark it with my stylus. And it's going to help hold it to stand up. To join it, I'm going to score it first with cross hatching. Do the same thing here. And I'm going to add some slip to it. Slip's just light and water. Just put it on one side. And grab a joining tool. I use something with like a curved edge, that really helps me. I'll turn it this way actually. And then to join, you want to just make sure that you're creating a bridge. You're sealing it, connecting it, making two pieces one. So I cover right over that line, create a bridge like a band-aid. This clay is actually pretty soft, so I'm struggling to stay. Sometimes slabs are better with a little bit harder clay, like leather hard clay. You can let them sit overnight sometimes. But now I've got two slabs that are joined together. So that's your goal for today, is to get something like that done. That's good. Thanks.
Welcome to the digital illustration tutorial. Our first step is going to be to bring in our portrait, and so I'll drag that in now. This is our background layer, and the first thing I'm going to do is unlock it by double-clicking it, and just click OK. And the next step is going to be to hit Control-J to make a duplicate of that layer. It's going to be important that we keep all of our layers really well organized, so I'm going to label this right away Posterized. I then need to make a series of other layers which aren't going to have anything in them at the moment, but it'll help us get set up for later. The first layer is going to be called Contours. The next, Highlights, Shadows, Midtone Light, and Midtone Dark. My next step is to select the Posterize layer and go to Image, Adjustments, and Posterize. I'm going to set the levels here to 3, and you can see it reduces the number of different levels of value here. We're going to unify the colors in just a moment. I'm going to click OK. My next step is to go to Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation. And here what I need to do is first click Colorize, and I can see my saturation is down around 25 right now. I'm going to turn that back up to 50. And then at this point, you can pick a hue that you think is going to be an interesting group of colors for you to use. I'm going to select a hue that I like, and that looks good to me there, and I'll click OK. My next step is to click Image, Adjustments, Brightness, Contrast. And here I will turn up the brightness a little bit and turn up the contrast a little bit as well. And click OK. My next step is to click on Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and set the radius to 2, and then click OK. My next step here is to hide the posterized layer and all of the other layers except for my background layer and my contours layer. I'm going to select the contours layer and zoom in on an area to begin. It doesn't really matter where you start. I'm going to switch to my brush tool at this point, and I'm going to start with a small brush. I'm going to select with my right mouse key to bring up the adjustment to change the width of the brush. And I'm going to start with a pretty small one. I think 5 pixels will be good. And at this point, I'm also going to be switching to use of the tablet. To this point, I've been using the mouse. If you don't have a tablet in front of you, that's fine. But if you do, this would be the place to begin to use it. I'm going to start to draw over the major contours that I see. I'm going to switch my color here to black as well. And you can see I have pen pressure on right now, meaning that if I press down harder on the stylus, it will create a little bit of a thicker line. Sometimes it takes a couple of attempts to get the line just right. And if you feel more comfortable with the mouse, you're welcome to use that. So in here, what I want to do is use a series of broken lines. I don't want to necessarily outline everything. Sometimes a broken line, otherwise known as an implied line, will give you a better effect. And I'll go back in here and do a couple of these eyelashes in a minute. Don't get too caught up in the details. Right now, we're trying to hit all the major contours of the face. We can always go back and add detail later. This step will take you a little while. You've got to work on each individual element of the face. And if I zoom out a bit, we'll see how to deal with some other areas. For example, the nose, we're going to be building up primarily out of values. I could use a couple of contours here, particularly around the bottom of the nostril, perhaps a little bit of an implied line around the outside, but what I don't want to do is have a line that looks something like this, which really outlines the shape of the nose. It ultimately will give your drawing or your illustration a little bit of a childish look. I'm going to back up those steps here. And only where I really see a distinct contour should I be putting down one of these lines. Lips as well. I'm not going to be drawing every element here because a lot of this detail is going to be coming up when I work on my value layers. So you can see I'm just using a whole series of little contours, just indicating the basic shape. And if I hold down my spacebar on the keyboard here, I can move around my image. Even in these dark areas here, I'm going to have a little bit of a broken line to help me understand where the edge of that is. Of course, anywhere where the head touches the background, I'd need a line. So I'm going to be working on this for a couple of minutes. Once I've finished up all of my contours, we'll pick back up and I'll show you how to use the other layers. Okay, welcome back, and you can see now that I have finished up my contours. One thing I'm going to do at this point is to allow us to be able to see these contours without having the background photo on. So we're going to go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Solid Color. Click OK here, and it's going to ask you what color you want to use. I'm going to select white. And so now we can start to see the image. which is exactly what we want, about this level of detail at this point. We may go back later and add some more. To work on the highlights, I'm going to hide the fill layer, hide the contours layer. I want to turn my posterize on and have my highlights on and selected in blue, as you can see here. And what we're going to be focusing on right now is the area of the image represented by this color here, this light blue. What I need to do at this point is to take my color picker tool and click. Now, if I start to paint over top of the highlight area with this color, the problem is I can't actually see where I've already painted. And so what I'm going to do now is turn off the posterize. You can see that I did make a mark, but it's not visible because it's the exact same color. So what I want to do is actually shift the color just slightly, either slightly lighter or slightly darker. And now when I make a mark, I can see very clearly where I've actually been. At this point, there's a couple ways to do this. You can either sort of hand color all of the area that is this hue, or what I think is a little bit faster is making an outline and then filling that in with the paint bucket. So I'm going to select, switch it over to my stylus now, to a very thin line, and I'm simply going to outline around the area of highlight. This line needs to be continuous, meaning that if it's broken at all, the paint bucket won't work. And so only areas that are continuous are going to get highlighted. I'm actually going to go back and get that value a little bit later. So a little area like this, I'm going to just do by hand. And so I'll work my way around. Using my space bar to bring up the hand tool, which allows me to move the composition. And pretty quickly I can outline the contour area. If I select my paint bucket now and do a single click, you can see there's a little bit of a blue line here. To get rid of that, just click the paint bucket a second time. All right, so now I've got that done. I need to do that for all highlight areas of my image except for the background. We're not going to do the background at all. So anything on my shirt I will do, face, neck of course, but nothing behind the figure. So I'll continue to work on that. I'm going to pause now, finish up my highlight layer, and pick the video back up when I'm finished. Okay, so my highlights are done, and I can see if I turn off everything except for the highlights and the fill layer, you can start to see an indication of the face. You can play around with these layers to see if they're matching up the way that you think they should, and this looks pretty good to me. At this point, I'm going to hide my highlights layer, turn on my posterize, and turn on my shadows, and I'm going to be working in the shadow layer. What I want to do is, again, select an area to start, and I'll start up around here. I'm going to use that same technique of outlining and using the paint bucket to fill. Switching to my stylus here. Again, I need to change my colors. So instead of using black, I'm actually going to use a dark blue. And that looks pretty good to me there. Okay. So again, at the top of the head here, you want to make sure that your line is sketchy, it's sort of brushy. We don't want it to be too smooth because remember this is hair, which has got quite a lot of texture to it. So I'm keeping that brush moving, using that space bar to help me move around my image. And right now I'm just making a continuous line. If it's not continuous, the paint bucket technique will not work. So I'm going to work my way around these edges, and I'll finish that up in a minute. For detail areas like the eye, of course, you're going to need to be a bit more precise if you want this to come out and look like you, which it should, this being a portrait. And I'll fill all this in. So I'm going to pause in a minute here. Continue to fill in any area of black with your new shadow color, any area except, of course, the background. So you can see that I finished up my shadow layer. I can turn on my highlight layer, and of course there's going to be a space between because we haven't filled in our midtones yet. At this point, what I want to do is turn on my midtones light, turn off everything else except for posterize. And of course, you need to be selected in the midtone light layer, or your different tonal values are going to get mixed up. This layer is going to be painted the lighter blue here, so I'll select that lighter blue. And again, I need to shift that a little bit lighter or darker. I'll go a little bit lighter this time so that I can see my mark. And here, I don't want to get too caught up in all the little areas where it starts to break apart. I want to keep my line moving. And if I fill in an area like this, of course, I can use that paint bucket technique. If you prefer to just use a slightly larger brush, that's fine as well. Now here, I can actually color over this midtone dark. The midtone dark is going to be the layer on top. And so that will actually be visible in the final image. But at this point, I can cover over it. So I'm going to continue to work on these areas here. Looking around my image, just looking for areas where I can identify that value. So of course down the bridge of the nose. And here I'm going to use a kind of a broken line. I don't necessarily want that very, very thick line throughout. Keeping your brush size the same throughout your image is going to give it a little bit of a boring look. I want to try to vary the brush width pretty constantly. That's a lot easier to do with the stylus, with the tablets, than it is with the mouse, where you're constantly changing your brush size. So I'm going to continue to work around the face like this. I'm going to finish up this layer and pick back up in just a moment. So you can see here my midtone light layer against that white fill background. And at this point, I'm going to work on my last layer, which is the midtone darks. I'll turn the layer on, turn off midtone light, turn on my posterized layer, and at this point, we should be pretty familiar with the process. I'm going to select my color, shift it just slightly. I'll go slightly lighter, and then continue to fill in anywhere that I see this value.